What started as routine late-night banter exploded into television chaos when comedian Bill Burr clashed with Jimmy Kimmel over cancel culture, leaving audiences stunned as tensions reached a breaking point that would forever change both men's careers. The studio lights dimmed as Jimmy Kimmel adjusted his tie, flashing that familiar grin toward camera 2. The audience's applause filled the cramped Hollywood studio as he launched into his monologue, but tonight felt different. There was an edge in his voice, a sharpness that regulars in the audience might have picked up on. Behind the scenes, producers had been whispering about declining ratings and network pressure. Kimmel needed a win tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, our next guest is a comedian who never holds back, sometimes to his own detriment, Kimmel announced, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Please welcome Bill Burr. The Boston comedian strode onto the stage with his characteristic swagger, waving briefly to the crowd before taking his seat. Burr looked relaxed, almost amused, as if he knew something the audience didn't. The two men shook hands, but even that brief contact seemed forced, lasting a split second too long as they sized each other up. "Bill, great to have you back," Kimmel began, settling behind his desk. "You've been making headlines lately with some pretty strong opinions about comedy and what people can and can't say anymore." Burr leaned back in his chair, a slight smirk playing across his face. "Jimmy, I've been saying the same stuff for 20 years. It's just that now everyone's got their phones out, ready to be offended by everything." The audience chuckled nervously. Kimmel's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "But don't you think there's value in being more conscious about how our words affect people? Especially marginalized communities?" "Marginalized communities?" Burr's eyebrows shot up. "Jimmy, you're worth $50 million, you live in a mansion, and you're lecturing me about marginalized communities? That's rich." The studio fell uncomfortably quiet. Kimmel's laugh sounded hollow as he tried to regain control. "I'm just saying that as entertainers, we have a responsibility." "Responsibility to who?" Burr interrupted, his voice rising slightly. "To the network executives who sign your checks? To the advertisers who pull out the moment someone says something that might hurt their bottom line?" Kimmel's jaw clenched. This wasn't going according to script. "Bill, I think you're missing the point. We're talking about basic human decency here." "Human decency?" Burr let out a bitter laugh. "Jimmy, you built your career making fun of people. Remember when you used to do blackface? Or when you mocked entire groups of people for cheap laughs? Now suddenly you're the moral authority?" The color drained from Kimmel's face. The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing the conversation had crossed a line. Camera operators glanced nervously at each other, unsure whether to keep rolling. "That was years ago, Bill. People grow. They learn." Kimmel started, but his voice cracked slightly. "Oh, they learn? Or do they just learn to say what's safe? What keeps them employed?" Burr was leaning forward now, his finger pointed at the host. "You want to talk about responsibility? How about being responsible for your own hypocrisy?" Kimmel's hands gripped the edge of his desk. "I think we should move on to talking about your tour." "No, Jimmy, let's not move on. Let's talk about how you've become exactly what you used to make fun of. A sellout who's so afraid of losing his job that he'll throw anyone under the bus to stay relevant." The tension in the studio was palpable. Audience members were looking around at each other, some pulling out their phones to record what was clearly becoming an unprecedented meltdown. Kimmel's producer was making frantic gestures from behind the cameras, but both men seemed oblivious to everything except their escalating confrontation. "You know what your problem is, Bill?" Kimmel's voice had dropped to a dangerous whisper, his famous affability completely gone. "You're angry that the world moved on without you, that your brand of comedy doesn't work anymore because people actually care about treating each other with respect." Burr stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backward. "My brand of comedy? Jimmy, my brand is honesty. Something you wouldn't recognize if it bit you on your privileged ass." The audience gasped audibly. Several people in the front row had their phones up, clearly recording. Kimmel shot to his feet as well, his face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. Honesty? Kimmel's voice was shaking now. You call it honesty, but it's just cruelty dressed up as comedy. You hide behind telling it like it is because you're too lazy to evolve. Evolve? Burr's laugh was harsh and cutting. You mean sell out? You mean compromise everything you ever believed in for a paycheck? If that's evolution, Jimmy, then I'll stay extinct. The two men were now standing face to face across the desk. The pretense of a friendly talk show interview completely shattered. The studio lights seemed harsher somehow, casting stark shadows across their faces as they glared at each other with undisguised contempt. You know what, Bill? Kimmel's voice was barely controlled fury now. I think we're done here. But Burr wasn't backing down. In fact, he seemed to be just getting started, his eyes blazing with the kind of righteous anger that had made him famous. The audience held its collective breath, sensing that whatever came next would change everything. Done? Jimmy, we're just getting started, Burr shot back, his Boston accent thickening with emotion. You want to sit there in your ivory tower and judge everyone else's comedy while you've built your entire career on cheap shots and kissing up to whoever's in power that week. Kimmel's hands were trembling now. Whether from rage or humiliation, wasn't clear. You're out of line, Bill. This is my show. Your show? Burr laughed bitterly. This isn't your show, Jimmy. This is corporate television at its finest. You're just the puppet they wind up every night to dance for the cameras. And you know what the saddest part is? You actually think you matter. The audience was dead silent now, except for the occasional nervous cough or the soft click of phone cameras capturing every second of the meltdown. The show's band members were looking back and forth between each other, clearly wondering if they should intervene somehow. Kimmel stepped around his desk, moving closer to Burr, with deliberate, measured steps. You think you're so authentic, Bill? So real? You're just bitter because you never made it to where I am. You're still playing clubs while I'm hosting one of the biggest shows on television. Made it? Burr's voice cracked with incredulous laughter. Jimmy, you call this making it? Sitting behind that desk every night, reading jokes written by a room full of Harvard graduates, pretending to care about causes you know nothing about? You're not a comedian anymore. You're a talking head. The accusation hit Kimmel like a physical blow. His face went white, then red again, cycling through emotions faster than anyone in the audience could follow. At least I didn't peek in dive bars telling jokes about my ex-wife to drunk college kids. That did it. Burr's entire demeanor changed, his playful antagonism replaced by something much darker and more personal. My ex-wife? Really, Jimmy? That's where you want to go? Let's talk about your personal life then. Let's talk about how you treat your staff, how you throw people under the bus the second they become inconvenient. You don't know what you're talking about, Kimmel hissed, but his voice lacked conviction. Don't I? I've heard the stories, Jimmy. I know how you operate behind the scenes. All that fake kindness disappears the moment the cameras stop rolling, doesn't it? You're just another Hollywood sociopath who learned to smile on cue. The studio felt like a pressure cooker about to explode. Audience members were whispering to each other, some starting to stand up as if they might need to leave quickly. The show's security guards had moved closer to the stage, clearly unsure of their next move but ready to act if necessary. Kimmel was breathing heavily now, his chest rising and falling as he struggled to maintain some semblance of control. You want to know the truth, Bill? The truth is that you're a relic. Your time is over. Comedy moved on without you because you refused to grow up. Grow up? Burr's voice rose to near shouting levels. You mean shut up? You mean fall in line? You mean sell my soul like you did? Jimmy, I'd rather be a relic than whatever the hell you've become. The confrontation had moved beyond professional disagreement into something deeply personal and vicious. Both men looked like they were barely restraining themselves from physical violence, their faces inches apart as they traded insults that cut to the bone. You know what your real problem is? Kimmel's voice was shaking with rage. You're jealous. You're jealous that I figured out how to stay relevant while you're still stuck in the past, telling the same tired jokes to the same shrinking audience. Burr stepped back slightly, a cold smile spreading across his face. Relevant? Jimmy, you're about as relevant as a broken clock. Sure, you're right twice a day, but the rest of the time you're just wrong and loud about it. The insult landed with devastating precision. Kimmel's facade finally cracked completely, his carefully maintained public persona dissolving before everyone's eyes. When he spoke again, his voice was raw with barely contained fury and something that sounded dangerously close to desperation. You want to talk about broken? Let's talk about your career, Bill. Let's talk about how you peaked 15 years ago and you've been riding that same angry white guy shtick ever since. At least I evolved. At least I grew beyond screaming into microphones about how unfair life is. Burr's eyes narrowed dangerously. The comedian who had built his reputation on controlled chaos was now witnessing his host completely lose control, and he wasn't about to let the opportunity pass. Evolved? Jimmy, you didn't evolve. You got neutered. They took everything that made you interesting and replaced it with focus group-tested talking points. The audience was now openly uncomfortable, with several people in the back rows actually getting up and heading for the exits. Those who remained were transfixed by the spectacle, their phones capturing every moment of what was clearly becoming television history for all the wrong reasons. Kimmel's producer was frantically signaling from behind the cameras, making throat-cutting gestures that both men were completely ignoring. The show had gone completely off the rails, and everyone in the studio knew it, except for the two men locked in their verbal deathmatch. You know what, Bill? Kimmel's voice cracked as he spoke. I'm tired of pretending you matter. I'm tired of pretending your opinion carries any weight. You're a has-been comic who never had the talent to make it to the next level, and you're taking it out on everyone who did. That was the final straw. Burr stepped forward again, closing the distance between them until they were practically nose to nose. Has-been? Jimmy, I sell out theaters coast to coast while you beg celebrities to come on your show so you can kiss their asses for an hour. Who's the real has-been here? I don't beg anyone, Kimmel shot back, his voice rising to match Burr's volume. They come to me because I have something you'll never have. Respect. Class. The ability to conduct myself like a professional. Professional? Burr's laugh was harsh and mocking. Jimmy, you just spent the last 10 minutes having a public breakdown on your own show. You call that professional? This is exactly what I'm talking about. You're so delusional you can't even see what's happening right in front of you. The truth of Burr's words seemed to hit Kimmel like a physical blow. He looked around the studio for the first time since the confrontation began, taking in the horrified faces of his audience, the nervous expressions of his staff, the cameras that were capturing every second of his meltdown. The realization of what was happening seemed to dawn on him all at once. Get out, Kimmel said quietly, his voice barely audible over the studio's air conditioning. What? Burr cupped his ear mockingly. I'm sorry, Jimmy, I couldn't hear you. Could you speak up? I said get out, Kimmel screamed, his voice echoing through the studio with startling intensity. Get off my stage. Get out of my studio. You're done. But Burr wasn't finished. If anything, Kimmel's breakdown only seemed to energize him further. Your stage? Your studio? Jimmy, this isn't yours. This belongs to the network, to the advertisers, to everyone except you. You're just the guy they hired to fill the chair. Kimmel was shaking now, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Security! Security! Get him out of here! Two security guards started moving toward the stage, but they seemed hesitant, unsure of how to handle a situation that had escalated so far beyond anything in their training. Burr noticed them approaching and turned to address them directly. Gentlemen, I'll save you the trouble, he said, his voice suddenly calm in contrast to the chaos around him. But first, let me ask you something. How many times have you had to escort someone off this stage? How many guests has your boss here completely lost control with? The guard stopped, clearly uncomfortable with being dragged into the confrontation. Kimmel was gesturing frantically at them, his face purple with rage. "Don't you dare talk to my security," Kimmel snarled. "Don't you dare try to turn this around. You came on my show and you disrespected me. You disrespected my audience." "I disrespected you?" Burr interrupted, turning back to face Kimmel one last time. "Jimmy, I told the truth. If you can't handle the truth, maybe you shouldn't have invited someone who's known for telling it." The final exchange hung in the air like a challenge. Kimmel looked like he was about to explode again, his mouth opening and closing as he searched for a comeback that wouldn't come. The studio was so quiet you could hear the hum of the cameras, the soft whisper of the air conditioning, the nervous breathing of an audience that had just witnessed something unprecedented. Burr straightened, his jacket with deliberate calm, a stark contrast to the chaos he was leaving behind. He looked out at the audience one last time, then back at Kimmel, who was still standing frozen behind his desk like a statue of barely contained rage. "You know what the real tragedy is here, Jimmy?" Burr's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "You used to be funny. You used to have something to say. But somewhere along the way, you traded your backbone for a paycheck, and now you're just another corporate mouthpiece pretending to be edgy." Kimmel's mouth moved wordlessly, his face cycling through shades of red and white as he struggled to form a response. The audience watched in stunned silence as their host stood completely paralyzed by the truth of what he'd just heard. "And the saddest part?" Burr continued, addressing the audience now as much as Kimmel. "He knows I'm right. Look at him. He can't even defend himself because deep down, he knows exactly what he's become." With that devastating final blow, Burr turned and began walking toward the stage exit. But Kimmel, in a last desperate attempt to salvage some shred of dignity, called out after him, "Don't you walk away from me. Don't you dare walk away when I'm talking to you." Burr stopped dead in his tracks and slowly turned around, a look of genuine amazement on his face. "Jimmy, you're not talking. You're having a nervous breakdown on national television. There's a difference." The comedian's words hung in the air as he resumed his walk toward the exit. Kimmel, now completely unhinged, came around from behind his desk and actually took several steps after him. "You think you're so tough? You think you're so honest? You're just a bully, Bill. You're just a mean-spirited bully who gets off on tearing people down." Burr paused at the edge of the stage, his hand on the curtain that led backstage. When he turned back one final time, his expression was almost pitying. "Jimmy, I'm not the bully here. I'm just the guy who called out the Emperor for having no clothes. The fact that you can't handle that says everything about you and nothing about me." The studio erupted as Burr disappeared behind the curtain. Some audience members were actually applauding, others were booing, and many were just sitting in shocked silence, their phones still recording the aftermath of what they'd witnessed. Kimmel stood alone on his stage, abandoned by his guest and exposed in front of his audience. "Cut to commercial!" Kimmel screamed at his production team, his voice cracking with desperation. "Cut to commercial right now!" But the damage was already done. In the age of social media and instant replay, there was no hiding what had just happened. The confrontation was being shared, dissected, and analyzed before Kimmel could even make it back to his dressing room. The show's producer, finally, stepped onto the stage, trying to calm the audience and restore some semblance of order, but it was too late. The carefully constructed facade of late-night television had been shattered, and everyone in that studio knew they had witnessed something that would be talked about for years to come. As the cameras finally stopped rolling, Kimmel slumped into his chair behind the desk, his head in his hands. The studio lights seemed harsh and unforgiving now, illuminating a man who had been completely undone by his own inability to handle criticism. Backstage, Burr was already gathering his things, completely unfazed by the chaos he'd left in his wake. When a panicked production assistant approached him asking about damage control, he simply shrugged. "There's nothing to control," he said calmly. "That was just honest conversation between two comedians. If Jimmy can't handle that, maybe he should find a different line of work." Within hours, clips of the confrontation were trending on every social media platform. Kimmel Meltdown became the #1 trending topic worldwide, with millions of views and shares. Comedy fans were split between those who praised Burr for his honesty and those who criticized him for his brutality, but everyone agreed on one thing: they had never seen anything like it. The fallout was swift and devastating for Kimmel. Sponsors began pulling their advertisements, citing concerns about the host's professionalism and temperament. Network executives held emergency meetings about damage control and public relations strategies. The ratings for that night's show became the highest the program had seen in years, but for all the wrong reasons. Entertainment journalists worked overtime to analyze every moment of the confrontation, breaking down the psychology behind both men's behavior and speculating about what it meant for the future of late-night television. The incident sparked nationwide conversations about authenticity in entertainment, the price of fame, and the thin line between honest criticism and personal destruction. In the days that followed, Kimmel issued a carefully worded public apology, crafted by his publicists and approved by network lawyers. But the damage was done. The mask had slipped, and audiences had seen the man behind the carefully constructed persona. His ratings never recovered, and within months, rumors began circulating about his contract negotiations and the show's future. Meanwhile, Burr's career experienced an unexpected renaissance. His honesty and willingness to speak truth to power, regardless of the consequences, resonated with audiences hungry for authenticity in an increasingly artificial entertainment landscape. His tour dates sold out faster than ever, and his social media following exploded overnight. The confrontation ultimately became a defining moment for both men, highlighting the fundamental difference between those who prioritize truth over comfort and those who choose safety over authenticity. It served as a stark reminder that in the entertainment industry, respect must be earned through honesty and integrity, not manufactured through corporate messaging and careful image management.